constant cloud cover hides all sensor activity. Russia has crossed the forbidden line. They violated the airspace of Poland, a NATO member, and as a result, NATO fighter jets directly shot down the drone, an unprecedented incident. As a result, all of Europe has been engulfed in tension. Today, let's take a closer look at this issue. Let's get right into it. Let's review what happened. I uploaded a video yesterday, so some of you may already know. On September 9th, a Russian drone entered Polish airspace. They were mostly in eastern Poland, but some drones also reached central Poland. A total of 23 drones violated Polish airspace. Many of these drones originated from Belarus, and some entered Polish airspace while conducting airstrikes against Ukraine. After Russia violated Poland's airspace, a NATO member, NATO responded immediately. F-35 fighter jets and Polish fighter jets were immediately scrambled and began shooting them down one by one. Poland's air defense system also went into the highest state of readiness. The Polish Military Operations Command said they use Excel to identify targets and are neutralizing drone-type objects. Polish and Allied fighter jets are in their own airspace, and ground-based air defense and radar systems are now at peak readiness. The Polish Territorial Defense Forces, a reserve unit, are also expected to be mobilized. Local Polish media predict mobilization orders may soon be issued, mainly for soldiers near Russia and Belarus. The problem is that this provocation by Russia has caused damage in Poland. A Russian drone hit a civilian house, causing major damage. As a result, there were no casualties, but the tension has reached its peak. Russia has sent drones into Poland before. There have been several prior incidents, but this is the first time since the outbreak of the Ukraine war that Poland has directly shot down Russian military equipment. Polish forces shot down 3 or 4 of 23 drones that entered their airspace. Therefore, the United States and several European countries are monitoring the situation closely. Poland is a NATO member, and under the treaty, an attack on one member is seen as an attack on all. Russia's breach of Polish airspace is serious and could expand the war to involve the United States and most of Europe. Currently in the United States, more politicians claim Russia is attacking Poland with drones, calling it an act of war. NATO is worried about creating a very hostile relationship with Russia. After the airspace violation, Poland called on NATO to respond strongly. The Baltic states also agreed with this, but the problem is that NATO stated that the intrusion of unmanned vehicles like drones does not constitute a hostile act. It seems Russia may have intentionally caused this, targeting this spot. If this occurs, a gap will form between countries like the Baltic states or Poland, which face direct Russian threats, and countries like the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, which are less affected, causing division. If this happens, NATO's unity could be broken. Later, Article 4 of NATO was invoked at Poland's request, but NATO made a mistake by openly stating the drone that entered Poland was not considered an attack. As I mentioned earlier, Article 4 of NATO was invoked at Poland's request. Article 4 of NATO states that if a member feels its security, independence, or territory is threatened, all allies must consult together. It enables urgent security issues to be discussed as needed. Article 4 of NATO has been invoked about 6 times, most recently in 2022 after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This shows just how seriously NATO and its member countries are taking this issue. Of course, this doesn't mean it will instantly trigger collective defense. It seems they can coordinate various responses, such as strengthening air defense systems, expanding surveillance activities, and increasing diplomatic pressure. So why did Russia provoke this? Analysts see 2 main reasons. One is, as I mentioned earlier, to foment division within NATO, and the other seems to be to test where NATO's red line is. Since the Ukraine war began, NATO has repeatedly said it won't intervene directly. However, they've made it clear that if a member state's territory is violated, Article 5 of the Collective Defense Treaty will be invoked. But in reality, the exact boundaries of that standard are still unclear. For example, would Article 5 be invoked if a drone simply crossed the border, or would it only be triggered if a missile actually landed? President Putin is exploiting this gray area by sending drones across the border to test NATO's response. If NATO doesn't respond strongly, he'll learn he can attempt bigger provocations in the future. If NATO responds quickly and firmly, Russia will have to reconsider how far they can push. In the end, this incident is not just a simple airspace violation, but can be seen as a political bait thrown by Putin to test NATO's patience. In summary, Russia's recent action is not just a case of a lost drone, but a strategic gamble aimed at shaking the unity of the West and at the same time testing NATO's red lines. And this gamble is making the whole of Europe extremely unstable. The reason this incident is even more serious is not just because of the conflict between Russia and NATO, but also because it has revealed subtle tensions and differences in policy within NATO itself. Poland and the Baltic states have called for a swift, strong response. These countries border Russia or were once under Soviet control, so they never take Russian threats lightly. The Baltic states have firmly stated that violating Polish airspace is equal to violating their own territory and have raised the possibility of invoking Article 5. Poland immediately urged NATO to take decisive action, arguing Russia should no longer go unchecked. Germany and France had very different attitudes. Both countries warned that direct military conflict with Russia could trigger catastrophe in Europe and stressed caution. In Germany, there is already growing criticism at home that too much financial support is being poured into Ukraine, and France also lacks the capacity to handle a full-scale war with Russia amid domestic political instability. For this reason, both countries have drawn a line on whether the drone incursion can really be considered an act of war, showing an attitude of trying to avoid unnecessary escalation. As a result, at a moment when NATO needed to speak with one voice, cracks have begun to appear as each country's individual interests have come to the surface. Eastern European countries, which are directly threatened along the front lines, are demanding an immediate military response, while Western European countries, which are relatively farther away, are showing a preference for diplomatic solutions and easing tensions. This difference is not just a matter of opinion, but a critical factor that will determine NATO's unity and credibility going forward. If Russia sees this incident as proof of NATO's internal divisions, they will likely launch even bolder provocations. In the end, this situation is not just about the violation of Polish airspace, but rather an event that puts NATO's unity to the test. In fact, for President Trump, this kind of provocation is likely to be a major setback. President Trump is currently leading efforts for a ceasefire in Ukraine. After a summit with President Putin, little progress was made toward a ceasefire, and with the violation of Polish airspace, most analysts think President Trump's ceasefire efforts may be in vain. Because of this, President Trump is expected to put pressure on Russia to bring them directly to the negotiating table. That pressure is likely to come in the form of tariffs. But the problem is, even if tariffs are imposed on Russia, if Russia were willing to comply just because of tariffs, the war would have ended a long time ago, right? Therefore, the war in Ukraine is likely to last longer. Russia stated it had no intention of targeting Poland with a drone. They added that the Russian drone, thought to have crossed into Poland, has a range under 700 kilometers. However, they said they are ready to consult with the Polish Ministry of Defense about the drone incursion. The Russian Kremlin declined to comment on the incident, but countered the European Union's accusation of provocation by saying the European Union and NATO rarely provide evidence for such claims. Given the outlook, this incident probably won't be just a one-time provocation. Poland plans to send more troops to its eastern border and boost air defenses. NATO is considering boosting early air operations and rotating fighter jets over the Baltic Sea and Polish airspace. In the medium term, it is highly likely that the scale of joint military exercises among NATO member countries will be expanded, and support for Ukraine will be further strengthened. Russia may try another gray zone provocation while carefully analyzing this response. In the end, this incident clearly shows that NATO and Russia are dangerously walking a tightrope just short of a full-scale confrontation. If this tension isn't resolved, Europe will face prolonged security instability. So what choice will Poland make? Hostile views of Russia are rising in Poland, but the consequences of this provocation remain to be seen. What do you all think about this kind of provocation against Russia? Please let us know in the comments. That's the end of the video, thank you.